The moment you abandon the throne, a person can wake in peace and lose command of an entire day in less than 30 seconds. The room is quiet. Morning light rests against the wall. For a brief moment, the mind has not yet been claimed by the world. Then the phone lights up. A message appears. Perhaps it is criticism. Perhaps it is a demand. Perhaps it is only a few careless words from someone whose opinion should not possess so much power. The body reacts before thought has fully formed. The jaw tightens. The chest contracts. The mind begins building arguments, defenses, predictions, and accusations. Breakfast is forgotten. The work that mattered is pushed aside. The message becomes the hidden center of the day. Nothing physical has taken control of the room. No one has entered and issued an order. Yet something outside has taken command of what happens inside. Most people imagine that power is lost only in dramatic moments, when a contract collapses, when a relationship ends, when a public failure exposes them, or when another person openly dominates their choices. But inner authority is usually surrendered in smaller ways. It is surrendered when a notification decides where attention goes. It is surrendered when fear cancels a necessary conversation. It is surrendered when anger chooses the words before wisdom is allowed to speak. It is surrendered when a person breaks a promise to himself because discomfort arrived and demanded relief. The world does not need to defeat you in order to govern you. It only needs to become faster than your awareness. This is the central problem of inner command. Between an event and your response, there is a narrow territory. It may last several seconds. Sometimes it lasts only the length of one breath. Within that territory, perception, emotion, memory, and habit compete to give the next order. When that space remains unconscious, the loudest impulse usually wins. When it becomes visible, choice returns. Inner command is not the cold suppression of emotion. It is not the performance of calm while anger burns unexamined beneath the surface. It is not pretending that pain does not hurt, that injustice does not matter, or that every circumstance can be changed by a peaceful attitude. A person can be calm and still leave a harmful situation. A person can feel fear and still take protective action. A person can experience grief without allowing grief to decide every future step. Command does not mean that only one voice exists within you. It means that no single voice is allowed to rule without examination. Fear may present a warning. Anger may reveal that a boundary has been crossed. Shame may expose the ache of belonging. Desire may point toward growth or toward escape. Each emotion can speak. Each thought can offer its interpretation. But the final decision belongs to the part of you capable of seeing the whole field. That capacity is not mystical. It is trained through attention, language, boundaries, delayed response, emotional regulation, and the repeated fulfillment of your own word. It grows every time you notice an impulse without immediately obeying it. It grows every time you choose a response you will still respect after the emotional storm has passed. It grows when you stop asking, "What will relieve me fastest?" and begin asking, "What action is most aligned with the person I intend to become?" There is a reason this work can feel difficult. Reaction is immediate and command is deliberate. Reaction promises relief. Command asks for responsibility. Reaction gives you someone to blame. Command returns you to the uncomfortable truth that even when you did not choose what happened, you still participate in what happens next. This does not mean blaming yourself for every wound, loss, or condition. Many things arrive without permission. Other people can cause real damage. Systems can be unfair. Bodies can become ill. Accidents can alter a life. Inner command is not the fantasy that you control reality. It is the refusal to let reality take more authority than it has already taken. You may not control the message, but you can choose when to answer it. You may not control another person's mood, but you can decide whether to organize your identity around it. You may not control uncertainty, but you can prevent urgency from disguising itself as wisdom. You may not control the first emotional wave, but you can learn not to build your future from its highest point. Throughout this journey, we will examine the exact moments in which authority is surrendered. We will look at the invisible agreements made with approval, fear, impulse, and distraction. We will slow down the first 3 seconds after a trigger. We will listen to the language that turns thoughts into commands. We will place emotions where they belong, not in chains and not on the throne, but within a wise internal council. We will learn to guard attention as territory. We will build boundaries without turning every disagreement into war. We will practice delayed response until urgency no longer feels sacred. We will explore how command functions under pressure when calm is not easy and the consequences are real. And finally, we will rebuild the one form of authority that cannot be borrowed from status, wealth, admiration, or force. Trust in your own word. The work is demanding because it removes the comfort of automatic blame without denying the reality of harm. It asks you to distinguish what was done to you from what you are now doing with what remains. That distinction is where freedom becomes practical. There is no final state in which you never react again. Even the most disciplined mind can be surprised, wounded, exhausted, or afraid. The purpose is not perfection. The purpose is recovery. How quickly can you notice that the throne has been abandoned? How honestly can you name what has taken your place? How gently and firmly can you return? A sovereign mind is not a mind without weather. It is a mind that remembers the sky. There is also a social dimension to this work. We live among systems designed to compete for attention and accelerate response. Outrage is profitable because it keeps the eyes fixed. Urgency is useful to anyone who wants consent before reflection. Constant comparison weakens the ability to hear an individual calling. Inner command is therefore not only personal discipline, it is a form of protection against environments that benefit when consciousness remains fragmented. Yet protection should not become paranoia. The aim is not to treat every message, institution, or relationship as an enemy. The aim is to meet influence consciously. You can receive news without living inside alarm. You can use technology without allowing every signal to become an instruction. You can participate in community without surrendering the right to think. You can love deeply without making another person the sole authority over your worth. This journey will ask for honesty more than intensity. You will not need to transform every habit at once. You will need to notice one reaction, one command, one boundary, and one private promise with greater precision than before. Inner authority grows through these ordinary acts. It becomes visible not in dramatic declarations, but in the quiet moment when the old pattern appears and you choose differently. Before we begin, consider one question, not as an accusation, but as an opening. Who is giving the orders inside your mind? If this journey speaks to the part of you that is ready to live with greater clarity and self-command, take a quiet moment to subscribe. This space exists for those who are no longer willing to let fear, noise, and unconscious reaction govern their lives. The path begins not when the world becomes silent, but when you learn to hear yourself clearly within the noise. Chapter 1. The Invisible Surrender. The first surrender rarely looks like surrender. It looks like checking whether someone has replied. It looks like opening the same conversation for the 7th time, hoping a new interpretation will appear. It looks like explaining yourself to a person who has already decided not to understand. It looks like changing your plans because someone may be disappointed, even though that person never asked what the plan was costing you. These moments appear harmless because no one is physically forcing you. Yet inner command can be lost without visible coercion. It is lost whenever an external event is allowed to dictate your internal posture, before you have examined what the event actually means. Imagine two people receiving the same criticism from a supervisor. The first hears the words and immediately feels exposed. Before the supervisor finishes speaking, the mind begins defending itself. The body leans forward. The voice becomes sharp. The person interrupts, explains, and names every circumstance that made the mistake understandable. By the end of the conversation, the original criticism is no longer the central issue. The reaction has created a second problem. The person now appears unable to receive information without turning it into a threat. The second person feels the same initial discomfort. There may be heat in the face, tension in the stomach, and an impulse to explain. But the impulse is noticed. The criticism is allowed to finish. The person asks a question. Which part of this is most important for me to correct? Perhaps the supervisor is right. Perhaps the criticism is incomplete. Perhaps it is unfair. None of those possibilities require an immediate emotional verdict. The person leaves with useful information, or with a clear understanding that the criticism does not deserve further authority. The event was the same. The difference was not personality, intelligence, or worth. The difference was where command remained during the first wave of discomfort. We often believe that a strong reaction proves independence. We say, no one will speak to me that way, no one will disrespect me, no one will question what I know. But when another person's words can instantly determine our tone, our focus, and our next action, we are not demonstrating freedom. We are demonstrating predictability. Anything that can reliably trigger you can begin to steer you. This is why manipulation often begins with emotional speed. A person who wants control may provoke shame, urgency, fear, or outrage because those states reduce reflection. A message arrives late at night. Answer me now. A salesperson warns that the opportunity will vanish in minutes. A relative suggests that love should be proven through immediate sacrifice. A stranger online uses insult to pull you into a conflict that serves no purpose beyond consuming attention. The content changes, but the mechanism is the same. An external pressure attempts to bypass your judgment and reach directly for your behavior. Not every pressure is deliberate. Many people are not calculating manipulators. They are simply acting from their own fear. A stressed colleague may spread urgency because urgency is the only way he knows how to function. A parent may use guilt because guilt was used on her. A partner may demand reassurance because uncertainty feels unbearable. Understanding this does not require you to obey it. Compassion and command can exist together. The invisible surrender also appears through approval. When your emotional stability depends on being understood, liked, praised, or included, other people receive an authority they were never qualified to hold. A change in their expression becomes a command to perform. Their silence becomes a command to chase. Their disappointment becomes a command to betray your own limits. Approval is not wrong. Human beings are relational. We naturally care how we affect one another. The problem begins when feedback becomes identity and preference becomes permission. Then a person no longer asks, was my action honest, responsible, and aligned with my values? The person asks, did they approve? This shift seems small, but it changes the entire chain of command. A life directed by approval becomes a series of negotiations with invisible audiences. You rehearse what to say before entering a room. You soften a truthful answer until it no longer contains truth. You delay necessary work because it may be criticized. You choose goals that will be admired rather than goals that are genuinely yours. And because no audience remains satisfied forever, the mind becomes permanently alert for the next sign of acceptance or rejection. The same surrender occurs through the need to correct every opinion. Someone misunderstands you. Someone tells an incomplete story about your decision. Someone judges a season of your life without knowing what preceded it. The urge to explain can become overwhelming because the ego interprets misunderstanding as a loss of control. It believes that if every person does not hold the correct image of you, your identity is in danger. But your identity cannot be secured inside every other mind. There are explanations that matter. Honest communication can repair relationships, clarify agreements, and prevent harm. Yet there are also explanations that become offerings placed before people who have no intention of receiving them. Inner command requires discernment. Is this conversation capable of producing understanding, or am I spending energy trying to control an image that does not belong to me? Sometimes the most sovereign response is a clear explanation. Sometimes it is one sentence. Sometimes it is silence followed by consistent action. The invisible surrender is also present in everyday distraction. A device vibrates and attention moves before a decision has been made. A headline creates anger, and the mind carries that anger into work, conversation, and sleep. A minor inconvenience becomes the center of an afternoon because the mind keeps returning to it as if repetition could change the event. Attention is not merely where you look, it is where your psychological resources are sent. Whatever repeatedly receives those resources begins to shape your internal environment. If the world can redirect your attention on command, it can influence your mood, your priorities, and eventually your character. This is why inner command begins with observation rather than force. For one day, notice the moments when your state changes quickly. Do not judge yourself. Do not try to become invulnerable. Simply become precise. What message creates immediate tension? Whose silence makes you abandon your own plans? What criticism produces the urge to defend before you have listened? What uncertainty sends you searching for reassurance? What notification enters your mind without permission? What emotion becomes an instruction? The purpose of these questions is not to identify enemies. It is to reveal access points. Every system has points through which influence enters. A house has doors and windows. A computer has passwords and permissions. A mind has beliefs, fears, desires, and unfinished wounds. Inner command does not require sealing every opening. It requires knowing which openings exist and deciding what is allowed through them. Consider a person who becomes angry whenever someone questions his competence. He may believe the problem is disrespectful people, yet if the reaction is examined, he may discover an older fear. If I am wrong, I am worthless. That belief turns ordinary correction into a threat. Until it is seen, anyone can activate it. Another person may feel panic when a partner needs space. Beneath the panic may be the belief that distance always means abandonment. The partner's request is not experienced as information. It is experienced as a command to pursue, persuade, and prevent. The reaction may then create the very distance the person fears. The external event matters, but the hidden meaning often determines the response. This is where responsibility becomes liberating. Responsibility does not mean that everything is your fault. It means that the internal meaning is accessible to examination. You may not be able to control another person's behavior, but you can investigate why that behavior acquires such power inside you. You can question the belief, regulate the body, clarify the boundary, and choose a different action. A person under inner command still feels the first wave. The goal is not to become stone. The goal is to stop confusing the wave with the ocean. When criticism comes, you can ask whether it contains useful information. When pressure comes, you can ask who benefits from your urgency. When guilt comes, you can ask whether you have violated a value or merely disappointed an expectation. When fear comes, you can ask whether danger is present or uncertainty is simply uncomfortable. When anger comes, you can ask what boundary needs action and what part of the anger only wants spectacle. Each question interrupts automatic obedience. The invisible surrender ends when the invisible becomes visible. An access point is not a character flaw. It is simply a place where old meaning and present pressure meet. The purpose of identifying it is not to become ashamed of sensitivity. It is to prevent sensitivity from being used without your consent. A locked door is not stronger because it hates visitors. It is stronger because entry is deliberate. You may discover that some triggers require repair rather than mere restraint. A conversation may be overdue. A workplace pattern may need documentation. A wound may need professional support. Recognition is not the end of command. It is the beginning of an honest response. Today, choose 3 moments in which something outside you is allowed to give orders inside you. Write them down plainly. Do not write, "My boss ruins my peace." Write, "When my boss criticizes my work, I feel an immediate need to prove my value." Do not write, "My partner controls me." Write, "When my partner withdraws, I abandon my priorities and pursue reassurance." Do not write, "Social media wastes my time." Write, "When I feel uncertain about my work, I reach for distraction instead of remaining with the task." Precision returns authority because it reveals the exact exchange. Then ask, what external event is currently allowed to give orders inside me? What does it command me to feel, believe, or do? What would become possible if I noticed the command without obeying it? You do not need to solve the entire pattern today. The first act of command is recognition. Once you see the moment of surrender, a new territory appears between what happened and what happens next. It is brief, but it is enough. Within that territory, the throne is still empty. The old reaction is approaching. The body is preparing. The familiar words are rising. The next chapter begins there inside the first 3 seconds. Chapter 2. The first 3 seconds. A difficult message appears on the screen. The first second belongs to the body. Before you have formed a complete thought, the nervous system detects significance. The heart changes rhythm. The breath becomes shallow. The muscles prepare for action. A sensation rises through the chest, throat, or stomach. Something has happened, and the body wants to know whether it must defend, escape, pursue, or freeze. The second belongs to interpretation. The mind takes the incomplete information and begins telling a story. This is disrespect. This is rejection. This is danger. This proves what I feared. They are trying to control me. I am about to lose something important. The story may be accurate, partly accurate, or entirely wrong. In the second, accuracy is not the mind's first priority. Speed is. The third belongs to impulse. Reply, attack, explain, apologize, buy, leave, call, send another message. Make the pain stop now. These 3 seconds do not always unfold neatly. They can overlap, repeat, and intensify. But within them a decision is forming before wisdom has received the full report. This is where inner command is most fragile and most available. People often try to repair reactions after they have become actions. They apologize for the message, recover from the purchase, repair the relationship, or explain the outburst. These repairs matter, yet command becomes far more powerful when it enters earlier, before behavior hardens around the first emotional wave. Consider 2 possible futures born from the same email. In the first future, the message reads, "We need to discuss what happened with the client." The person immediately assumes failure. The body tightens. Without asking for context, he writes a defensive reply explaining every obstacle, naming colleagues who contributed to the problem, and suggesting that expectations were unrealistic. He reads the message once, feels a brief surge of relief, and presses send. 10 minutes later, more information arrives. The client was satisfied. The discussion was meant to address a new opportunity. The defensive message now creates confusion and weakens trust. What caused the damage was not the email. It was the speed with which uncertainty was converted into certainty. In the second future, the same physical reaction appears. The same fear offers the same interpretation. But the person notices the body before opening the reply box. He places both feet on the floor. He breathes slowly enough to interrupt the acceleration. He reads the email again and sees what is actually written rather than what fear added. He replies, "Understood. What time would be useful, and is there anything you would like me to prepare?" The difference between the 2 futures may be less than a minute. A pause is often misunderstood as hesitation, weakness, or lack of confidence. In reality, a deliberate pause protects information. It prevents emotion from narrowing the field before facts have arrived. It allows the body to settle enough for perception to become accurate. The pause does not need to be dramatic. You do not need to close your eyes, perform a ritual, or disappear for an hour every time something uncomfortable happens. Sometimes command is 1 breath before speaking. Sometimes it is 10 minutes before sending a message. Sometimes it is 1 night before making a commitment that could alter a year of your life. The length of the pause should match the weight of the decision. A small irritation may need 3 seconds. A difficult conversation may need an afternoon. A financial commitment, resignation, move, or major relational decision may need several days. Urgency should be examined, especially when another person benefits from your speed. There are situations in which immediate action is necessary. If physical safety is threatened, a child is in danger, a medical emergency is unfolding, or a critical system is failing, command may require speed. But even then, speed is not the same as panic. Trained responders act quickly because they have reduced unnecessary decisions in advance. Their discipline allows motion without chaos. The purpose of the pause is not to avoid responsibility. It is to prevent an unexamined state from becoming the author of a consequential action. To practice this, you must learn the body's early language. For some people, anger begins in the jaw. For others, anxiety begins as pressure beneath the ribs. Shame may appear as heat in the face. Fear may produce cold hands, restless movement, or a sudden inability to think beyond one possible outcome. The body is not betraying you. It is announcing that a command sequence has begun. Most people notice emotion only after it becomes a thought or behavior. They say, "I suddenly exploded. I do not know why I sent it. I just found myself buying it. I could not stop calling." But there were signals. They were simply faster than conscious attention. The skill is not eliminating those signals, it is recognizing them earlier. When you feel the first tightening, stop. Do not demand that the emotion disappear, do not argue with it. Let the body tell the truth. Something in me feels threatened, pressured, rejected, or uncertain. Then breathe. A slower exhalation can help reduce the intensity enough to restore choice. This is not magic, and it does not erase the problem. It changes the conditions under which the problem will be considered. Then observe. What happened, in fact? What meaning did I add? What action is the impulse demanding? What consequence could follow if I obey immediately? Then delay when possible. Delay is not avoidance when you name when you will return. You can say, I need time to think. I will answer tomorrow morning. You can write the message and leave it unsent. You can place an item in the cart and return after 24 hours. You can step out of a heated room and agree to continue the conversation when both people are able to listen. Finally, choose. The response may still be firm. You may say no, you may leave. You may confront a lie, report misconduct, end a contract, protect a boundary, or ask a direct question. Command does not guarantee a gentle outcome. It guarantees that the action represents your values more than your first surge of chemistry. The method is simple. Stop, breathe, observe, delay, choose. Simple methods are not always easy methods. The first wave often argues that there is no time. It says that silence will look weak, that waiting will cost the opportunity, that the other person will win, or that the discomfort will become unbearable. The impulse presents speed as the only path to safety. This is why practice must begin in small moments. Pause before answering a question that irritates you. Pause before opening an app from boredom. Pause before agreeing to a request you have not considered. Pause before correcting someone who misunderstood a minor detail. Pause before adding another explanation to a message that is already clear. Each small pause teaches the nervous system that discomfort can be survived without immediate obedience. Over time, a new confidence develops. It is not confidence that every decision will be correct. It is confidence that you can remain present long enough to make a decision consciously. This matters because many regrets are not produced by evil intentions. They are produced by temporary states given permanent authority. A person ends a relationship during an hour of rage. A person quits a job during a week of humiliation. A person makes a purchase during a night of loneliness. A person reveals private information during a moment of wanting connection. A person accepts a commitment during a burst of enthusiasm and later discovers that the cost was never examined. The state passes. The consequence remains. Inner command asks a different question. Will I still respect this action when the state that produced it is gone? That question can protect years. There is another reason the first 3 seconds matter. They shape how the other person responds. Emotional speed invites emotional speed. One sharp sentence produces another. Tone accelerates. Each person begins reacting not to the original issue, but to the reaction of the other. Soon the conflict contains 10 injuries that did not exist at the beginning. A pause can interrupt this multiplication. You may not calm the other person. You may not prevent escalation entirely, but you can refuse to donate your nervous system to the cycle. You can speak slowly enough to hear yourself. You can ask one clarifying question. You can decline to continue while insults are present. You can leave without performing contempt. The pause is not surrender. It is the place from which a boundary becomes clean. The pause can also protect dignity when another person is waiting for your reaction. Provocation often depends on speed. The aggressor expects the insult to become your immediate identity. A measured silence breaks that sequence. It gives you time to decide whether the moment deserves correction, distance, documentation, or no further energy at all. This does not mean every response should be delayed until emotion disappears. Emotion may remain. The standard is not emotional absence, it is enough internal space to choose a proportionate action. For the next 24 hours, practice one rule. No important response will be given from the first wave of emotion. When the wave arrives, name it. I am in the first wave. Do not shame yourself for it. Do not pretend to be above it. Let it be intense without letting it be final. Write the reply, but do not send it. Feel the anger, but do not make the threat. Notice the fear, but do not cancel the future. Hear the pressure, but do not sign the agreement. Experience the urge, but do not confuse urgency with truth. Then return when more of you is present. At first, this may feel unnatural because reaction has been rehearsed for years. But every conscious pause creates evidence that a different chain of command is possible. The world will continue to speak quickly. People will make demands. Devices will flash. Old wounds will translate uncertainty into danger. Your body will still prepare for defense before your mind understands why. But there is a threshold between preparation and obedience. Stand there for one breath. In that breath, the first command has not yet become your action, and once you learn to remain in that space, you begin to hear another voice beneath the urgency, the voice that does not shout because it does not need to. The next chapter is about that voice, and about the language through which it gives its orders. Chapter 3. The voice that gives the orders. Not every thought is a command, but many thoughts speak as if they are. I have to answer. I cannot tolerate this. They must understand me. I need to know what happens next. If I do not act now, everything will be lost. This always happens to me. Nothing will ever change. These sentences often arrive with the force of fact. They do not introduce themselves as interpretations. They do not say, "Here is one possible reading of the situation." They enter the mind wearing the uniform of authority. The problem is not that such thoughts appear. The mind generates rapid interpretations because it is trying to protect, predict, and organize. The problem begins when language turns an emotional state into an unquestioned order. Imagine a person waiting for a response after an important conversation. Hours pass. The first thought may be simple. They have not replied. Then language begins adding structure. They are ignoring me. They do not respect me. I need to send another message. I cannot sit here and do nothing. If I wait, I will lose control. The body responds to these sentences as though they describe confirmed reality. Anxiety rises, and the rising anxiety makes the sentences feel even more credible. Soon the person is no longer responding to silence. The person is responding to a story built around silence. Language creates the bridge between sensation and action. This is why inner command requires listening to the exact words used inside the mind. General awareness is not enough. Saying, "I feel bad," hides the mechanism. Saying, "I notice the thought that their silence means I am being rejected," reveals it. The second sentence creates distance without denial. Distance does not mean the thought is false. It means the thought has not yet earned authority. Many internal commands begin with obligation. I must prove myself. I have to keep everyone happy. I need to solve this tonight. I cannot disappoint them. I should be further ahead by now. Some obligations are real. Bills must be paid. Promises matter. Children require care. Safety can require immediate action. But many internal obligations are inherited rules that have never been examined. A child who learned that love depended on usefulness may become an adult who hears every request as a command. A student praised only for achievement may experience rest as moral failure. A person raised around unpredictable anger may believe that disagreement must be resolved immediately because unresolved tension once meant danger. The adult mind may use present-day language, but the orders can come from an older world. One of the most powerful questions you can ask is, whose voice does this sound like? The voice may resemble a parent who confused control with care. It may resemble a teacher who treated mistakes as evidence of deficiency. It may resemble a former partner whose criticism became internal law. It may resemble a culture that taught you that worth must be earned through exhaustion, speed, beauty, wealth, or obedience. Recognizing the source does not make the voice disappear. It changes your relationship to it. What once sounded like truth can now be heard as conditioning. There is also a voice created by fear itself. Fear speaks in absolutes because uncertainty is difficult to hold. Always, never, everyone, no one, ruined, impossible, too late. Absolute language compresses a complex situation into a total verdict. One disappointing result becomes, "I always fail." One conflict becomes, "No one can be trusted." One delayed opportunity becomes, "I have missed my only chance." The mind prefers a painful certainty to an open question because certainty creates the illusion of control. But the price is accuracy. Inner command does not replace every negative sentence with a cheerful one. Forced positivity can become another form of avoidance. The purpose is not to say everything is perfect when it is not. The purpose is to use language that is precise enough to support intelligent action. Instead of, everything is falling apart, you might say, 2 parts of the plan have failed, and I do not yet know the full consequence. Instead of, I cannot handle this, you might say, I feel overwhelmed, and I need to reduce the problem to the next step. Instead of, they must respect me, you might say, I can state my boundary and decide what I will do if it is ignored. Instead of, I need an answer now, you might say, uncertainty is uncomfortable, but I can wait until more information is available. Precision lowers the false authority of the first story. There is a useful transformation that can be practiced whenever a thought arrives as an order. Change the command into an observation. I must act now becomes, I notice a strong urge to act now. They are humiliating me becomes, I am interpreting their words as humiliation. I cannot survive this becomes. Part of me is afraid that this pain will not end. I need them to approve becomes. I feel a powerful desire for reassurance. This shift may seem small, but it moves the thought from the throne to the council table. It is allowed to speak, but it no longer speaks as the entire self. A thought observed can be questioned. A thought obeyed without awareness becomes behavior. The language of command also shapes identity. When you say I am an angry person, the emotion becomes a permanent definition. When you say anger rises quickly in me under certain conditions, the pattern becomes specific and workable. When you say, I am weak, the sentence closes the door. When you say I avoided this because I was afraid, the behavior can be examined without turning it into a destiny. Identity statements are powerful because the mind tries to remain consistent with them. This is one reason careless self-description can become self-instruction. Every repeated I am may become a quiet order about what actions are available. This does not mean pretending to be someone you are not. It means refusing to turn a current pattern into a permanent prison. The voice of inner command sounds different from the voice of impulse. Impulse uses urgency. Command uses clarity. Impulse says, make this feeling disappear. Command asks, what does this situation require? Impulse says, defend your image. Command asks, is there something useful to learn? Impulse says, win this exchange. Command asks, what outcome matters after the exchange is over? Impulse says, avoid discomfort. Command asks, what discomfort serves growth and what discomfort signals harm? Impulse often shouts. Command often speaks in one clean sentence. There is no need to create a dramatic inner character or imagine yourself as a ruler issuing commands to an army. The metaphor is useful only if it returns you to responsibility. The real practice is simpler. Notice the instruction hidden inside the thought and decide whether that instruction deserves action. For one day, carry a small page or use a private note. Each time your state changes, record the first complete sentence you hear within. Pay special attention to sentences beginning with, I must, I cannot, they always, this will never. I need them to, I have no choice, it is too late. What if? Do not correct the sentence immediately. Write it as it appears. At the end of the day, read the list and ask 4 questions. Is this a fact, a prediction, an interpretation, or an inherited rule? What emotion gives this sentence its force? What action does the sentence want me to take? What would a more precise sentence sound like? You may discover that the same few commands appear beneath many situations. I must not disappoint anyone. I need certainty before I begin. I cannot let people think badly of me. I have to be perfect before I am visible. I must act quickly or I will be abandoned. These are not merely thoughts, they are internal policies. A policy repeated long enough becomes a way of life. To change the policy, do not fight the sentence with another absolute. Meet it with a question and a choice. What evidence supports this? What evidence does not? What value is involved? What part is within my control? What action would I respect tomorrow? The goal is not endless analysis. There is a point at which reflection becomes another way of avoiding action. Inner command requires that thought eventually serve a decision. After examining the sentence, choose a new instruction. Wait until morning. Ask for clarification. Do not send the second message. State the boundary once. Complete the next 10 minutes of work. Allow them to misunderstand. Leave the room safely. Request help. Tell the truth without decoration. A useful command is specific, proportionate, and connected to values. It does not promise that the outcome will be comfortable. It tells you what is yours to do. Over time, the internal voice changes through repetition. It becomes less theatrical. It stops predicting total ruin from temporary discomfort. It learns that not every urge is urgent, and not every feeling is final. It begins to trust that you will listen without surrendering. This trust matters because suppression creates rebellion. If every emotion is answered with silence, denial, or contempt, the inner world becomes divided. A wiser command hears the fear, names the need, and still decides consciously. You can tell yourself, I know you want certainty. We do not have it yet. I know you want to defend us. We will respond when we can speak clearly. I know you are afraid of rejection. We will not abandon our values to prevent it. I know you want relief. We will choose the relief that does not create a larger wound tomorrow. This is not weakness, it is internal leadership. The voice that gives the final order should not be the loudest voice. It should be the voice capable of holding emotion, fact, consequence, value, and responsibility at the same time. That voice is built through practice. It is strengthened whenever you translate an absolute into a precise statement, whenever you separate a prediction from a fact, whenever you refuse to describe a temporary state as a permanent identity, whenever you choose a clean instruction over a dramatic impulse. Soon you begin to notice that emotion itself has been waiting to be heard differently. It does not always want the throne. Often it wants recognition, protection, or movement. The next chapter enters that inner council and asks a deeper question. What if emotions are not enemies to defeat or rulers to obey, but messengers whose reports must be understood? Chapter 4. The Emotional Chain of Command. Imagine an inner room in which every emotion is allowed to enter. Fear arrives first. It carries a stack of warnings. Some are useful, some are old, some belong to dangers that no longer exist. Anger enters next. It points toward a boundary and demands action. Sometimes it sees clearly. Sometimes it mistakes wounded pride for injustice. Shame sits quietly near the door. It does not usually speak in full sentences. It creates the feeling that exposure would be unbearable and belonging could be lost. Grief carries what cannot be restored. Desire carries what has not yet been reached. Anxiety arrives with maps of futures that may never occur. In an undisciplined mind, the emotion that enters with the greatest force takes command of the room. Fear cancels the journey. Anger writes the message. Shame hides the truth. Anxiety searches for certainty until exhaustion replaces clarity. In a mind under command, every emotion may present its report, but none receives automatic authority. This distinction is essential because many people attempt to gain control by suppressing emotion. They tighten the jaw, deny the fear, bury the grief, and call the result strength. Yet suppressed emotion does not disappear. It often returns as irritability, numbness, compulsive behavior, physical tension, or a reaction that seems disproportionate because it contains everything that was never allowed to speak. Inner command is not the expulsion of emotion. It is the organization of emotion. The first task is to name what is present. This sounds simple, but many reactions remain powerful because they are described vaguely. I feel terrible, I am stressed, something is wrong. These descriptions communicate distress without identifying its structure. Try greater precision. I feel embarrassed because I believe I appeared incompetent. I feel angry because an agreement was broken. I feel anxious because I cannot predict the outcome. I feel grief because something meaningful has ended. I feel envy because another person's success is touching an unlived part of my own life. Naming does not solve the emotion, but it gives it a place. An unnamed feeling spreads through the entire identity. A named feeling becomes one experience occurring within a larger self. The second task is to locate the emotion in the body. Where is it? Is it heat in the face, pressure behind the eyes, tightness in the throat, a heavy chest, restlessness in the legs, a collapsing sensation in the stomach. The body often reveals the emotion before the mind understands the story. By locating the sensation, you return attention to present experience rather than allowing interpretation to expand without limit. The third task is to ask what the emotion is trying to protect. Fear may be protecting safety. Anger may be protecting dignity, fairness, or control. Shame may be protecting belonging. Jealousy may be protecting significance. Anxiety may be protecting against surprise. Sadness may be protecting the value of what was lost. The protective intention does not make every reaction wise. It makes the reaction understandable. Suppose a person becomes angry when a colleague questions a decision. The anger may appear to protect authority, but beneath it may be fear of being exposed as inadequate. If only the anger is addressed, the person may become quieter while remaining internally threatened. If the deeper fear is recognized, the response can change. The person can ask, "Is my competence actually being judged, or is this a normal request for explanation? If I made an error, what does accountability require? If the question is disrespectful, what boundary can I state without turning the conversation into a performance of power?" The fourth task is to separate fact from prediction. Emotion often speaks about what may happen as if it has already happened. Fear says, "This will destroy everything." Shame says, "Everyone sees you differently now." Anxiety says, "You will not be able to cope." Anger says, "They will continue unless you strike back harder." Ask, what is happening now? What am I predicting? What evidence do I have? What information is missing? This is not an argument against emotion. It is a correction of scale. A real threat deserves action. A predicted threat deserves investigation. Confusing the two can produce both unnecessary panic and dangerous denial. The fifth task is to choose a response deliberately. A deliberate response may honor the emotion without obeying its first impulse. Fear may ask you to prepare rather than flee. Anger may ask you to set a boundary rather than humiliate. Shame may ask you to repair an error rather than disappear. Grief may ask you to rest and remember rather than abandon life. Anxiety may ask you to create a plan rather than demand certainty. The central sentence of emotional command is, "This emotion may speak, but it does not rule." There is a spiritual dignity in this posture. It does not treat the inner world as an enemy territory. It treats consciousness as a place worthy of wise governance. Emotions are not moral failures. A person is not bad because anger rises, weak because fear appears, or ungrateful because sadness remains. The ethical question begins with what is done through the emotion. Anger can become cruelty or courage. Fear can become avoidance or preparation. Desire can become exploitation or devotion. Grief can become withdrawal or a deeper reverence for life. The emotion supplies energy and information. Character shapes direction. This is particularly important when emotions are intense. A strong emotion narrows the field. It can make one interpretation feel like the only interpretation and one action feel like the only action. The mind may say, "I cannot do anything else." At that moment, the first responsibility is often not solving the external problem. It is reducing internal intensity enough for multiple options to become visible again. You may need to walk. You may need water, food, sleep, or distance. You may need to speak with someone trustworthy. You may need professional support. You may need to leave a dangerous environment immediately. Inner command includes recognizing when the system is overloaded and additional help is necessary. Self-mastery is not isolation. Asking for support can be an act of command when pride would otherwise keep you trapped. There are emotions that do not respond quickly to reflection. Trauma reactions, prolonged depression, panic, compulsive behavior, and severe anxiety may require qualified care. A spiritual framework can support healing, but it should not be used to blame a person for symptoms or replace appropriate treatment. Inner authority grows through honest use of every available resource. The same principle applies to injustice. Calm does not mean accepting mistreatment. Emotional regulation is not a demand to remain peaceful while harm continues. Sometimes the clear response is documentation, reporting, legal protection, distance, or departure. The difference is that action is guided by safety and values, rather than by an uncontrolled need for retaliation. A boundary set from clarity is often stronger than one set from rage. Rage may produce a dramatic moment. Clarity produces a sustainable decision. Consider a person whose relative repeatedly asks for money and responds with guilt when refused. Anger may rise because the pattern feels exploitative. If anger rules, the person may explode, insult the relative, and later reverse the boundary out of guilt. If anger is heard but not crowned, the person can identify the violation, decide what support is and is not available, and communicate that decision without debate. The emotion still matters. It revealed the cost, but the final response belongs to a larger intelligence. This is the emotional chain of command. Name the emotion. Locate it in the body. Identify what it is protecting. Separate fact from prediction. Choose the response deliberately. Practice this with one recurring emotion, not every feeling at once. When it appears, slow the sequence. I notice anger. It is in my chest and jaw. It is protecting a boundary and my fear of being dismissed. The fact is that an agreement was broken. The prediction is that I will never be respected unless I become aggressive. My response is to state the broken agreement, explain the consequence, and leave the conversation if insults begin. This process does not make you emotionless. It makes emotion more honest because it no longer needs to become a spectacle in order to be acknowledged. Over time, your inner world may become less extreme. Not because emotions lose depth, but because they trust that they will be heard before they must scream. A person who consistently ignores fear may experience panic. A person who ignores resentment may eventually erupt. A person who refuses grief may become numb. A person who denies exhaustion may lose the ability to choose rest before collapse. Inner command listens early. It notices the first signs and responds proportionately. It does not wait until a whisper becomes an emergency. There is another subtle shift. When emotions are no longer treated as identity, they can move. You are not anger. Anger is present. You are not anxiety. Anxiety is present. You are not grief. Grief is present. You are the awareness in which these experiences are being held, examined, and guided. This does not make the pain unreal. It makes the self larger than the pain. It is also useful to notice the difference between primary and secondary emotion. You may feel hurt first and anger second. You may feel fear first and contempt second. The secondary emotion often feels stronger because it protects you from the vulnerability beneath it. If you respond only to the surface, the deeper need remains hidden. Ask gently, what was here one moment before this emotion became intense? The answer may reveal sadness, uncertainty, loneliness, or the fear of not mattering. Command becomes more compassionate when it addresses the original wound instead of only controlling the visible reaction. At the end of today, choose one emotional moment and reconstruct the chain. What happened? What emotion arrived? Where did you feel it? What did it try to protect? What story did it tell? What did you do? What response would better represent your values next time? Do not use the exercise to punish yourself. Use it to become familiar with the room. Soon you will see that one force enters the room more frequently than any single emotion. It arrives through screens, conversations, memories, and unfinished tasks. It decides which report receives attention and which disappears. That force is attention. And attention is not merely a mental habit. It is territory. Chapter 5. Attention is territory. Before a city can be governed, its gates must be known. Imagine a city with no guards, no schedules, and no distinction between public square and private chamber. Every messenger enters at any hour. Every merchant shouts inside the council room. Every stranger deposits a concern at the ruler's feet and demands immediate action. The city may possess wealth, talent, and strong walls, yet it will remain chaotic because access is uncontrolled. The modern mind often lives this way. A notification enters during prayer. A headline enters before breakfast. A stranger's opinion enters during work. A conflict from years ago enters while the body is trying to sleep. A comparison enters during a moment that should have belonged to gratitude. The gates remain open, and attention is treated as though it has no cost. But attention is not an endless substance. It is one of the most valuable forms of life you possess. Where attention goes, energy, memory, emotion, and time often follow. What repeatedly receives attention begins to feel important, even when it is not. What is repeatedly ignored begins to weaken, even when it matters deeply. This is why attention is territory. To govern attention is not to control every thought. Thoughts will enter uninvited. Sounds will interrupt. Responsibilities will demand movement. The goal is not perfect concentration. The goal is to decide what receives resonance, repetition, and authority. There is a difference between noticing something and hosting it. You may notice a cruel comment. Hosting it means replaying it through the day, imagining replies and letting it enter unrelated conversations. You may notice a financial concern. Hosting it means allowing worry to consume the very concentration needed to create a practical plan. You may notice another person's success. Hosting comparison means turning their timeline into evidence against your own life. The mind often returns to emotionally charged material because it believes repetition will produce resolution. Yet repeated attention without new action can become a form of captivity. Ask yourself how many problems you are actually solving when you think about them. Some thoughts lead to decisions, conversations, schedules, research, or repair. Others create a closed loop in which the same fear is reviewed without gaining new information. The loop feels active because the mind is busy, but busyness is not command. Attention under command moves between reflection and action. If a problem can be addressed, define the next step. If information is needed, identify where it can be found. If a conversation is necessary, schedule it. If no action is available today, choose when the issue will be reconsidered and return attention to the present task. This may sound practical rather than spiritual, but the protection of attention is a spiritual discipline. Attention determines what kind of inner world is being cultivated. A mind constantly fed outrage becomes prepared to find enemies. A mind constantly fed comparison becomes prepared to find deficiency. A mind constantly fed distraction loses the ability to remain with silence, difficulty, and depth. What you consume does not mechanically create your destiny, but it influences the material from which perception and decisions are formed. The first and last parts of the day are especially important. When the first act of the morning is opening a device, the world begins giving orders before your own priorities have been remembered. Messages, news, and requests create a borrowed agenda. Even if nothing urgent appears, the nervous system learns that waking means immediate access. A protected morning does not need to be elaborate. It may be 10 minutes without input. It may include water, breathing, writing, prayer, movement, or simply sitting before the day is opened. The purpose is to remember that your consciousness is not a public hallway. The final moments before sleep also matter. The mind carries unresolved stimulation into the night. An argument, endless scrolling, or alarming news can become the last architecture placed around the nervous system before rest. A closing ritual can signal that the gates are being secured. Turn off unnecessary input. Write down unfinished tasks so they do not need to be rehearsed. Name one concern and one action for tomorrow. Let the day end. Attention is also fragmented by constant switching. A person begins a page, checks a message, returns to the page, opens a second window, remembers an email, checks a headline, and then wonders why deep work feels impossible. Each switch leaves a small residue. Part of the mind remains with the previous task, and the next task receives only a fraction of full presence. The result is not merely lower productivity. Fragmentation can weaken self-trust. The person repeatedly intends to focus and repeatedly abandons the intention. Over time, the mind learns that every impulse will be granted access. Restoring command begins with creating visible boundaries around attention. Choose one task. Define a period. Remove unnecessary access. Expect the urge to escape. Return without drama. The return is more important than perfection. You will be distracted. You will remember something. You will feel boredom. The old pattern may reach for stimulation. Each return is a small act of command. This is where I have chosen to place my life for the next 20 minutes. Attention also requires relational boundaries. Some people bring every emotional emergency to the nearest available listener. Compassion may invite you to care, but compassion does not require unlimited access. You are allowed to ask whether the conversation is urgent, whether you have capacity, and whether your presence is actually helping. Listening can be sacred. Absorbing another person's chaos without limit is not the same as listening. You may say, "I care about this, but I cannot discuss it right now. I can give this 20 minutes. I think this situation requires support beyond what I can provide. I'm not willing to continue this conversation while we are insulting each other." These statements protect attention without treating people as burdens. There is also the attention stolen by imagined audiences. You create something, then repeatedly check how it is being received. You make a decision, then mentally rehearse how others may judge it. You enter a room already watching yourself through the eyes of everyone present. This divided attention makes authentic action difficult because part of the mind is always performing and another part is monitoring the performance. Inner command returns attention to the task itself. What am I here to say? What am I here to build? What does this person need from me? What value am I trying to express? What is the next honest action? The answer may not remove self-consciousness, but it gives attention a direction stronger than the imagined audience. There is another gate that deserves attention: repetition. A single headline may inform you. The 20th version of the same fear may condition you. A single conversation may help. Replaying it mentally for 3 days may only deepen the groove through which the same emotion returns. Ask whether new input is still adding understanding. If not, continued consumption may be an attempt to feel prepared while actually remaining activated. Command may require stopping before the mind feels finished. The same applies to entertainment and inspiration. Even beautiful content can become avoidance when it replaces creation, conversation, sleep, or direct experience. A person can consume hours of wisdom while postponing one honest action. Attention is not protected merely by choosing noble material. It is protected by remembering what the material is meant to serve. Create periods in which nothing new enters. Let the mind digest. Let insight become behavior. Silence is not empty when it gives experience time to become integrated. For the next 24 hours, conduct an attention audit. Do not attempt to improve everything immediately. Observe. What entered your mind? Who or what entered without invitation? What remained longer than it deserved? What repeatedly pulled you away from something important? What did you neglect because attention was occupied elsewhere? What left you clearer? What left you fragmented? Record the moments honestly. You may discover that a 5-minute check becomes 40 minutes. You may discover that one person's messages create hours of anticipatory tension. You may discover that news intended to keep you informed is instead keeping you activated. You may discover that your most creative hour is being spent answering requests that could wait. Then choose one gate to protect. Do not redesign your whole life in a night. Close one unnecessary entrance. Leave the phone outside the room for the first 20 minutes of the morning. Turn off one category of notifications. Create one uninterrupted work period. Stop reading comments after a defined time. Refuse one recurring conversation that produces heat but no movement. Write tomorrow's priorities before opening the world's priorities. The goal is not isolation. It is intentional access. A city with gates is not a prison. It is a place capable of receiving visitors without losing its center. Attention under command can move freely because it is not constantly being captured. It can listen deeply, work patiently, rest completely, and notice beauty. It can respond to crisis without treating every signal as crisis. It can offer compassion without becoming consumed by every sorrow it encounters. This is where spiritual life becomes practical. Presence is not an abstract state. It is the act of being where you have chosen to be. When you speak with someone, be there. When you work, give the task a protected field. When you rest, stop turning rest into a waiting room for guilt. When you grieve, let grief have honest space rather than scattering it through every hour. When you pray or reflect, Do not demand immediate answers. Remain long enough to hear what noise usually covers. If this journey is helping you recover parts of your mind that were scattered across noise, fear, and distraction, take a moment to subscribe. Let it become a quiet decision to continue strengthening your inner command whenever you return to this space. Attention is the gate through which every other practice enters. Without it, boundaries are forgotten, emotions become commands, and promises dissolve beneath distraction. With it, another kind of power becomes possible. You begin to see that many conflicts do not require more force. They require a clear door, a clean answer, and the willingness to maintain a decision without turning it into war. That is the work of the next chapter. Chapter 6. Boundaries without war. There are two ways to close a door. The first is to slam it with anger, remain beside it, and continue shouting through the wood. The door is technically closed, but the conflict still owns the room. The second is to close it calmly, lock it when necessary, and return to the life on your side of it. A boundary is not defined by how loudly it is announced. It is defined by whether it is clear, ethical, and consistently maintained. Many people were never taught this. They learned only two positions: compliance or explosion. They say yes until resentment becomes unbearable, then release months of unspoken anger in one destructive moment. Afterward, guilt arrives. The boundary is withdrawn. The pattern begins again. This cycle creates the illusion that boundaries cause conflict. In reality, delayed boundaries often create the conditions for conflict. A boundary is not a demand that another person change. It is a statement about what you will participate in, allow access to, or do in response to a behavior. You cannot control whether someone speaks disrespectfully. You can decide whether the conversation continues. You cannot force someone to be honest. You can decide what level of trust remains after dishonesty. You cannot make a relative stop asking for money. You can decide what you will give and what you will no longer discuss. You cannot force a colleague to respect your time. You can define availability, document agreements, and escalate through appropriate channels when necessary. This distinction returns the boundary to your own authority. An attempt to control says, "You must never do this again." A boundary says, "If this continues, this is what I will do." The first depends entirely on another person's obedience. The second depends on your consistency. This does not mean boundaries should sound cold or legalistic. They can be compassionate. They can acknowledge relationship, context, and emotion. But compassion should not erase clarity. A complete boundary usually contains 4 parts. First, the behavior or condition, when our conversations include insults. Second, the decision. I am not willing to continue speaking in that way. Third, the action. I will end the conversation and return when we can speak respectfully. Fourth, the absence of unnecessary debate. The boundary is not followed by 15 minutes of defending why respect matters. Many boundaries fail because they are buried beneath explanation. A person says no, then adds a long history, several apologies, possible exceptions, and reassurance that the other person's disappointment is deeply understood. The original no becomes difficult to find. The listener senses uncertainty and begins negotiating with the explanation. Over-explaining is often an attempt to control the other person's reaction. We hope that if our reasons are perfect, they will approve of the boundary. But a boundary does not require universal approval. It requires responsibility for its consequence. The guilt that follows a boundary can feel like evidence that the boundary was wrong. Sometimes guilt is useful. It may reveal that we acted harshly or violated a genuine obligation. But guilt can also be the emotional residue of changing an old role. If you were trained to keep peace at any cost, saying no may feel cruel even when it is necessary. If you are praised for being endlessly available, protecting your time may feel selfish. If love was linked to sacrifice, refusing a harmful request may feel like abandonment. Feelings are real, but they are not always verdicts. Ask, did I violate a value, or did I violate an expectation? Was I cruel or was I clear? Am I responsible for harm, or am I uncomfortable because another person is disappointed? These questions help separate moral repair from conditioned guilt. Boundaries without war also require tone. A calm voice does not weaken a firm decision. In many cases, it strengthens it. Anger may cause the other person to focus on your delivery instead of the issue. Calm removes that escape. This does not mean you must sound serene while frightened or furious. It means you do not need to perform aggression in order to prove seriousness. A shaking voice can still say no. Tears can accompany a boundary. Courage is not the absence of visible emotion. The essential point is that the message remains intact. This does not work for me. I am not available for that. I will not remain in this situation. I need the agreement to be honored. I will discuss this when we are both able to listen. I am leaving now. Short sentences protect command because they reduce opportunities for impulse to take over. There are situations in which directness must be stronger. Abuse, stalking, threats, coercion, or repeated violations may require immediate separation, documentation, professional guidance, legal protection, or emergency assistance. Inner command is not a request to negotiate safely with someone who has shown that safety is not respected. In dangerous situations, the boundary may be distance rather than dialogue. The spiritual language of peace should never be used to pressure a person into remaining accessible to harm. There are also institutional boundaries. At work, command may involve written records, clear timelines, role definitions, and appropriate escalation. A boundary is not always emotional. Sometimes it is administrative precision. For example, instead of repeatedly arguing about a colleague's missed responsibility, write, "The report was due Tuesday and has not been received. Please send it by Thursday at noon. If it is not available, I will proceed with the escalation process outlined in our agreement." The statement identifies fact, next step, and consequence. It does not diagnose character or invite a personal duel. A boundary becomes credible through follow-through. If you repeatedly announce consequences and never apply them, the words lose authority. This damages more than the relationship. It teaches your own mind that your decisions are negotiable under pressure. Therefore, do not set consequences you are unwilling or unable to carry out. A realistic boundary is better than a dramatic threat. Instead of, "If you are ever late again, I am done forever," you might say, "If the appointment is delayed more than 15 minutes without notice, I will leave and we can reschedule." Instead of, "I will never help you again," you might say, "I cannot provide more money this month." Instead of, "Do not contact me unless you genuinely mean it," say, "I need 1 week without contact and will reach out next Friday." Precision protects both people from the chaos of exaggerated promises. Boundaries also reveal information. When a clear, respectful boundary is met with understanding, the relationship may deepen. When it is met with disappointment but eventual respect, the relationship may adapt. When it is met with punishment, ridicule, threats, or escalating pressure, you learn something important about the structure of the relationship. The purpose of a boundary is not to test people, but boundaries often expose whether connection depended on your lack of limits. This can be painful. Some relationships survive only while one person remains endlessly available, silent, or compliant. When command returns, the relationship changes. The loss may be real. Yet preserving connection by abandoning yourself is not peace. It is delayed fracture. There is a difference between flexibility and self-betrayal. A healthy boundary can be reconsidered when circumstances change. You may choose to help, make an exception, forgive, or reopen a conversation. The key is that the choice comes from values and capacity, not from fear of disapproval. Inner command is not rigidity. A ruler who never listens becomes a tyrant. A person who never revises a boundary may use control to avoid vulnerability. Wisdom remains open to new information while refusing pressure that bypasses reflection. A boundary may also be internal. You may decide not to revisit a decision after a certain hour, not to check a person's status, not to continue an argument inside your head, or not to use exhaustion as permission for self-contempt. Internal boundaries are less visible, but they shape the same territory. The challenge is that no one else enforces them. You must become both the person who sets the line and the person who respects it. This is why a small, specific boundary is more powerful than a grand declaration. It gives your mind a condition that can actually be recognized and maintained. Boundaries can also protect what you wish to create. A morning hour, a financial reserve, A private idea or a period of recovery may require a no before it can become anything. Every meaningful yes is supported by boundaries that prevent the unnecessary from consuming its resources. Practice with one boundary that has remained unclear. Write the long version first. Include every reason, every frustration, and every fear. Then reduce it. What is the observable behavior? What is your decision? What action will you take? What explanation is truly necessary? What part are you adding only to secure approval? The final statement may be surprisingly short. This does not work for me, and I will not continue participating in it. Or, I care about you, but I cannot take responsibility for this decision. Or, I am willing to discuss the issue, but not while I am being insulted. Then rehearse the boundary without rehearsing the battle. Imagine the other person disagreeing. Imagine disappointment, pressure, or accusation. Let the discomfort arise. Your task is not to win the imagined argument. Your task is to remember the sentence. A boundary maintained calmly can feel unfamiliar because drama once provided the sensation of power. But drama consumes energy. Clarity conserves it. This is the deeper lesson. You do not need to make another person wrong in order to protect what is right for you. You do not need contempt. You do not need a public verdict. You do not need the perfect closing speech. You need a decision, a proportionate consequence, and the willingness to remain aligned when discomfort arrives. Boundaries without war prepare the mind for another discipline, waiting. Because once a line is drawn, pressure often appears. Someone wants an answer immediately. An offer expires. Loneliness asks you to reopen the door. Anxiety demands that uncertainty end. The next test of command is whether you can delay response long enough for desire and fear to lose their disguise of urgency. Chapter 7. The Discipline of Delayed Response. Urgency is one of the oldest disguises worn by fear. It says, decide now, answer now, buy now, leave now, promise now, fix the discomfort now. Sometimes urgency is real. A fire, an accident, a medical emergency, or an immediate threat demands action. But much of the urgency that governs daily life is emotional rather than practical. It is the pressure to escape uncertainty before understanding has matured. The discipline of delayed response is not indecision. It is the ability to keep temporary pressure from making permanent choices. Consider how many decisions are made for relief rather than alignment. A person sends a message not because the message is wise, but because waiting feels unbearable. A person accepts a business offer not because the terms are sound, but because the possibility of missing out creates panic. A person makes a purchase because loneliness has become sharp and the transaction offers a brief sense of movement. A person agrees to a request because the silence after saying no feels heavier than the cost of saying yes. A person ends a relationship during an argument because ending uncertainty feels easier than remaining with complexity. In each case, the action solves one problem: the immediate discomfort of not knowing, not being reassured, or not feeling in control. Then it creates a larger problem. Delayed response protects the future from the emotional weather of the present. This discipline begins by understanding that not every impulse deserves the same waiting period. Minor impulses may require 10 minutes. Emotional messages may require an hour or a night. Important financial, professional, or relational commitments may require several days. Irreversible decisions deserve enough time for excitement, fear, and pressure to settle into proportion. These are not rigid laws, they are protective structures. A person may create personal rules such as, I do not send important messages while angry. I do not accept major commitments during the first conversation. I wait 24 hours before non-essential purchases above a certain amount. I sleep before making decisions that would change work, housing, or relationship structure. I do not answer pressure with immediate agreement. Rules reduce the number of negotiations you must conduct with yourself while activated. This is why disciplined people often appear calm. They have already decided what will happen in certain emotional conditions. They do not need to invent wisdom while the storm is at its highest point. Delayed response is especially useful in communication. A message received in anxiety can produce a message written in anxiety. The second message often contains more interpretation than information. It asks questions that are actually accusations. It explains more than was requested. It tries to force certainty from another person. Before sending, ask, what is the purpose of this message? What fact am I communicating? What outcome am I trying to control? Would the message still be necessary if I felt secure? Will I respect its tone tomorrow? Sometimes the answer is to send a shorter message. Sometimes the answer is to ask one direct question. Sometimes the answer is to wait. Sometimes the answer is to communicate by voice, rather than through a screen where tone can be invented. The delay creates space for intention to become visible. Money is another arena in which urgency exerts control. Marketing often compresses time because compressed time reduces evaluation. Limited offer, last chance, only 2 remaining, act before midnight. Some deadlines are legitimate, but the emotional mechanism is still worth noticing. A wise buyer can ask, would I want this without the deadline? What problem does this purchase solve? What other uses exist for this money? What feeling am I trying to create? What information would I seek if the offer remained open for a week? The point is not to fear spending. It is to distinguish value from emotional anesthesia. Delayed response also protects relationships from artificial acceleration. A new connection may feel intense. The mind wants immediate certainty about where it is going. It may reveal too much, promise too much, or attach meaning to limited evidence. Excitement can be beautiful, but it is not the same as knowledge. Time reveals consistency. Can the person communicate when the mood changes? Do words and actions align? Can both people tolerate boundaries? How is disappointment handled? Does the relationship make room for reality or only for projection? The discipline of waiting allows affection to grow roots instead of being forced into a shape by longing. There is a similar pattern in conflict. After an injury, the need for immediate resolution may create false peace. One person apologizes before understanding. Another forgives before safety has returned. The conversation ends because both people are exhausted, not because the issue has been repaired. Delay can protect honesty. I am not ready to resolve this tonight. I need time to understand what happened. I want to continue this conversation when I can speak without attacking. I hear your apology, and I need to see what changes before trust is restored. These sentences refuse both revenge and premature closure. Delayed response is difficult because uncertainty is physically uncomfortable. The mind wants an answer not only for information, but for regulation. It believes certainty will restore safety. Yet many forms of certainty are unavailable. Another person's feelings, the outcome of an application, the future of a market, the success of a project, and the full consequence of a decision cannot always be known. Inner command includes the capacity to remain functional while part of life remains unresolved. This can be practiced deliberately. Choose one uncertainty that does not require immediate action. Notice how often the mind returns to it. Each time say, there is no new information. Thinking about this again will not create new information. I will return to it at the time I have chosen. Then direct attention toward an available responsibility. This is not denial. It is refusing to let uncertainty occupy the entire city. Delayed response also helps distinguish intuition from urgency. Intuition is often described as a quiet knowing. Urgency is usually accompanied by pressure, catastrophic prediction, and the demand to end discomfort. But the difference is not always obvious. Ask, does this inner signal become clearer when I slow down, or does it depend on remaining activated? Is it pointing toward a value, or only away from discomfort? Does it allow questions, or does it punish examination? Can I explain the practical reasons, even if the full sense is difficult to articulate? What would one night of rest change? A wise decision can contain intuition, reason, and emotion, without allowing any one of them to bypass the others. There are times when delay becomes avoidance. This happens when the person repeatedly asks for more time, but never returns to the decision. Waiting becomes a hiding place. Commanded delay has a boundary. I will review this tomorrow at 10. I will give an answer by Friday. I will gather these 3 pieces of information. I will speak with a qualified person, then I will decide. A deadline chosen consciously differs from a deadline imposed by panic. The purpose is not endless certainty. No decision is free from risk. The purpose is to decide with enough presence that the risk is understood and accepted. Consider the three doors that appear before many decisions. The first door shouts, "Choose me now or lose everything." The second promises, "Choose me and the discomfort will disappear." The third remains quiet. It does not promise relief. It asks you to wait long enough to see what each door actually contains. The third door is rarely the most emotionally dramatic. It is often the door of information, proportion, and self-respect. The discipline of waiting can be strengthened by learning to remain with small discomforts. Leave a minor question unanswered for an hour. Allow a message to wait while you finish the task in front of you. Sit with the desire to check, explain, or seek reassurance without turning the desire into action. These small practices widen your capacity for uncertainty. You may notice that the urge rises, reaches a peak, and changes even when nothing is done. This is important evidence. An impulse often presents itself as permanent, but it behaves more like a wave. If you do not build a decision at its highest point, another perspective can appear. Waiting also protects creativity. Early ideas are vulnerable to premature judgment. A project shared too quickly can become shaped by other people's reactions before its own structure is known. Delayed exposure gives the work time to become clear enough to receive feedback without losing its center. There is wisdom in allowing some things to remain unfinished, unnamed, or unseen for a season. Not every seed benefits from being dug up each day to prove that it is growing. Today, identify one decision that has been surrounded by artificial urgency. Remove the clock for a moment. What truly requires action now? What can wait? Who benefits from your speed? What consequence would delay create? What consequence could haste create? What information is missing? What choice will you still respect when the current emotion has passed? Then choose a waiting period that matches the decision. 10 minutes, 1 night, 3 days, a week. During that period, do not use waiting to rehearse fear continuously. Gather information, regulate the body, consult values, and continue living. This practice rebuilds authority because it teaches the mind that pressure does not automatically produce obedience. A demand can be heard without being accepted. An opportunity can be considered without being chased. An emotion can be felt without being converted into immediate action. A silence can exist without being filled. An answer can remain unknown without destroying the present. Every delay chosen consciously becomes evidence that your life is not governed by the loudest moment. Sooner or later, however, waiting ends. A decision must be made, and sometimes it must be made under real pressure. Plans fail, people panic. Consequences move quickly. The room may not become quiet before action is required. The next chapter enters that room. It asks what inner command looks like when calm is difficult, the facts are incomplete, and something meaningful is truly at stake. Chapter 8. Command under pressure. There are moments when life does not offer a quiet room, a full night of rest, or complete information. The call arrives while you are working. A family member is in trouble. A system has failed. A client is threatening to leave. A conflict is escalating. A plan that took months to build is collapsing in a few hours. In such moments, the mind may try to solve everything at once. It predicts consequences before facts are confirmed. It assigns blame before safety is established. It jumps between past regret and future catastrophe while the present moment waits for one clear action. Command under pressure begins by reducing the field. Imagine a room filled with people speaking at once. One person is frightened, another angry, another demanding a decision. Phones are ringing. Information is incomplete. The person with inner command does not become powerful by controlling every voice. The person becomes useful by identifying the next reality that requires attention. What is actually happening? What requires action now? What can wait? These three questions can restore structure when panic has turned the situation into one undifferentiated emergency. The first question separates fact from emotional amplification. What is actually happening? Not what might happen next week, not who should have prevented it. Not what the event says about your worth, not what the worst imagination can produce. What is happening now? A payment was missed. A person has not arrived. The system is offline. The test result requires follow-up. The agreement has been broken. The team does not have the needed information. Facts may be painful, but facts have edges. Panic has none. The second question identifies urgency accurately. What requires action now? Safety may require immediate movement. A deadline may require a short communication. A technical failure may require contacting the correct person. A medical concern may require qualified care. A conflict may require physical distance before conversation. The question protects attention from tasks that feel urgent because they are emotionally loud but do not change the immediate outcome. The third question creates a waiting room. What can wait? Blame can often wait. A complete explanation can wait. A permanent decision can wait. The public announcement can wait. The argument about who was right can wait. The question of what this means for the rest of your life can wait. Postponing these matters is not denial. It protects the present response from becoming crowded by secondary problems. There is a fourth question that brings values into the crisis. What response will I still respect tomorrow? This question matters because pressure can create actions that solve the moment by damaging the future. A leader humiliates someone publicly to regain control. A partner makes a threat to stop the other person from leaving. A parent says something cruel because fear has become anger. A business owner hides information because admitting uncertainty feels dangerous. The immediate pressure may decrease. Trust does not return so easily. Command under pressure is not always calm in appearance. Your heart may race. Your voice may shake. You may feel grief, anger, or fear. The goal is not performance, the goal is function. Can you continue distinguishing fact from prediction? Can you communicate what is known and unknown? Can you take the next necessary step? Can you avoid creating avoidable harm while dealing with unavoidable difficulty? This is a more realistic standard than emotional perfection. Pressure often narrows breathing and posture. The body leans toward the threat. Vision becomes literal and psychological tunnel vision. A brief physical reset can improve judgment. Place both feet on the ground if possible. Release the shoulders. Exhale longer than you inhale. Look at one stable object in the room. Speak more slowly than the panic wants you to speak. These actions do not resolve the crisis. They remind the nervous system that action can occur without total collapse. Communication under pressure should become simpler. State what is known. State what is not known. State what is being done. State when the next update will come. For example, the system has been unavailable for 20 minutes. We do not yet know the cause. The technical team is investigating, and the next update will be given at 2. This is more useful than speculation, false reassurance, or silence that invites panic to create its own story. In personal conflict, the same structure can apply. I understand that you are angry. I am not willing to continue while we are shouting. I will return to this conversation at 7. Or, the payment did not arrive as agreed. I need confirmation by noon. If it is not resolved, I will begin the next step in the contract. Clarity reduces unnecessary emotional movement. Command under pressure also includes asking for help. There is a false image of strength in which the capable person must carry every crisis alone. This image turns leadership into isolation. A person may hide confusion, refuse delegation, or delay expert assistance because needing help feels like loss of authority. But command is not omniscience. It is the ability to use reality as it is. If someone else has the skill, call them. If the problem requires legal, financial, medical, or technical knowledge, seek it. If your body is overwhelmed, ask another person to hold part of the process. If safety is involved, use available emergency resources. The refusal to ask for help can be another reaction of pride. Pressure also reveals whether values were prepared in advance. When there is no time to invent a philosophy, people return to what has been rehearsed. A person who has practiced honesty is more likely to tell the truth under pressure. A person who has practiced blame may search immediately for a target. A person who has practiced small boundaries can state a larger one when necessary. A person who has repeatedly abandoned his own word may find it difficult to trust any internal decision during crisis. This is why command under pressure is built before pressure arrives. You can create simple crisis principles. Safety before image, facts before speculation. The next step before the entire future. No permanent decisions from temporary panic, no public blame before private verification. Ask for help early. Communicate again when promised. These principles act as rails when the mind is moving too fast. There are also crises that do not end quickly. An illness, legal process, financial loss, caregiving season, or prolonged uncertainty may continue for months. Command cannot remain in emergency mode forever. The nervous system needs rhythm. In a prolonged crisis, divide time. What must be handled today? What can be scheduled? What support must become regular? What part of life can still contain rest, meaning, or connection? What decisions should be reviewed weekly rather than every hour? Without structure, the crisis expands until it becomes the entire identity. A person caring for someone ill may begin to believe that rest is betrayal. A person rebuilding after financial loss may interpret every quiet moment as laziness. A person in grief may feel guilty when laughter returns. But sustainable command includes protecting the strength required to continue. You are not more loyal because you collapse. You are not more responsible because you refuse support. You are not more serious because you surrender every part of life to the crisis. This does not minimize suffering. It prevents suffering from taking every available room. Pressure can also produce false certainty. The mind says, "This will never recover. Everything is ruined. I will always feel this way." These statements attempt to end uncertainty by declaring the worst outcome final. Return to time. What do I know today? What do I not know? What decision belongs to today? What decision belongs to a later version of me with more information? This protects the future from being sentenced by the present. Pressure can distort time. 5 minutes may feel like an hour, and one uncertain day may feel like a permanent future. Naming the time frame helps. This is a difficult hour. This is a demanding week. This season is not the whole of my life. Such language does not reduce the burden. It prevents the burden from claiming eternity. It can also help to assign roles. Who is gathering facts? Who is communicating? Who is caring for immediate needs? Who is making the final decision? Clear roles reduce duplicated effort and the conflict that arises when everyone tries to control the same part of the crisis. Practice command under pressure before a real crisis by creating a personal card written in simple language. When pressure rises, what is actually happening? What requires action now? What can wait? What response will I still respect tomorrow? Who can help? Keep the card where it can be reached. The purpose is not to become mechanical. It is to provide an external memory when internal memory is flooded. You may also rehearse one difficult scenario. Imagine receiving bad news, a harsh accusation, a financial setback, or an urgent demand. Do not rehearse catastrophe for the sake of fear. Rehearse the first wise actions. Breathe. Confirm facts. Protect safety. Communicate clearly. Delay what can wait. Ask for help. Review again. Mental rehearsal cannot control reality, but it can make command more available when surprise arrives. There is a deeper truth hidden inside pressure. Crisis strips away the illusion that command means controlling outcomes. You may do everything responsibly and still experience loss. You may communicate clearly and still be misunderstood. You may act quickly and still be unable to save what mattered. Inner command is not a guarantee of victory. It is the dignity of remaining conscious within uncertainty. It is the refusal to let panic become cruelty, fear become deception, or grief become the final definition of the self. It is the capacity to say, I cannot control all that is happening, but I can still choose the quality of my next action. After the pressure passes, review without self-attack. What did I do well? Where did I lose command? What information was missing? What system would help next time? What repair is needed? What can be released? This review turns experience into training. Eventually you discover that the most important preparation for pressure is not a technique. It is the relationship you have built with your own word in ordinary life. When no one is watching, do you follow through? When motivation disappears, do your commitments still mean something? When you make a small promise, does your mind believe you? The next chapter enters that private territory, where authority is either strengthened or quietly abandoned every day. Chapter 9. The standard you obey in private. A person can speak with authority in public and possess almost none in private. He can advise others to be disciplined while ignoring every promise made to himself. She can set standards for a team while abandoning her own work the moment motivation fades. A person can appear decisive in conversation and still live under the quiet knowledge that internal instructions are rarely followed. This creates a hidden fracture. The mind hears the morning promise, "I will begin at 7." 7 arrives, and the promise is renegotiated. The mind hears, "I will not contact them again tonight." Loneliness arrives and the message is sent. The mind hears, "I will save this amount, finish this task, protect this hour, or stop this habit." Discomfort appears, and the command dissolves. Each broken promise seems small, but repeated abandonment teaches the mind that your word is not a reliable source of direction. Inner command depends on self-trust. Self-trust is not the belief that you will always succeed. It is the evidence that you will tell yourself the truth, make realistic commitments, and return when you fail. Many people try to build discipline through intensity. They create a total transformation plan in one emotional evening. Tomorrow they will wake before dawn, exercise, read, meditate, work without distraction, eat perfectly, stop every bad habit, and complete months of neglected tasks. The plan feels powerful because it creates immediate hope, but it often asks a person with inconsistent self-command to carry 10 new commands at once. When the plan collapses, the person concludes that discipline is impossible. The problem was not always weakness. The promise was poorly designed. A command that cannot be followed consistently weakens authority. This does not mean goals should be easy. It means commitments should be specific, proportionate, and connected to reality. Instead of "I will become disciplined," choose "I will write for 20 minutes before opening social media." Instead of "I will fix my finances," choose "I will review every expense from the past 7 days." Instead of "I will never react again," choose "I will wait 10 minutes before answering when I feel angry." Instead of "I will transform my health," choose "I will walk for 15 minutes after lunch." A small promise fulfilled creates more command than a grand promise abandoned. This principle can feel unimpressive because the ego prefers dramatic beginnings, but character is usually built through repetition that receives no audience. No one applauds when you close the app and return to the page. No one sees when you stop yourself from sending the message. No one celebrates the amount you quietly save. No one knows that you got out of bed when no one was expecting you. No one hears the boundary you maintain in a private conversation. These moments are the private constitution of a life. The standard you obey in private determines how much authority your own mind grants you in public difficulty. When pressure arrives, will you believe your instruction to remain calm? When temptation arrives, will you believe your decision to wait? When a boundary is challenged, will you believe that you will maintain it? When the path becomes uncertain, will you believe that you can continue one step at a time? The answer is shaped by evidence. Self-trust grows through completed cycles. Decide, act, review, adjust, repeat. The review matters because rigidity is not command. A person may make a commitment and later discover that it was unrealistic, harmful, or based on incomplete information. Revising it consciously is different from abandoning it impulsively. For example, you may plan to work for 2 hours and discover that your body is genuinely exhausted. Command does not require ignoring health to prove strength. It requires making a conscious revision. I will rest for 30 minutes and complete 1 focused hour this evening. The revised decision remains specific. Abandonment says, I do not feel like it. Revision says, reality has changed, and this is the responsible adjustment. Learning the difference prevents discipline from becoming punishment. Punishment-based discipline relies on contempt. You are lazy. You are weak. You never finish anything. You do not deserve rest. You must suffer to prove commitment. This language may produce short bursts of action, but it damages the relationship between the commander and the commanded. The inner world becomes a place of threat. Eventually, avoidance becomes a form of protection. Respectful discipline sounds different. You said this mattered. The discomfort is expected. Begin with 10 minutes. Complete the next step. Rest when the work is complete. If the plan fails, review it honestly. This voice is firm without becoming abusive. The purpose of self-command is not to dominate yourself. It is to become someone your own nervous system can trust. Rest belongs within this trust. Many people break their word because their plans leave no room for recovery. They treat rest as a reward, rather than a biological and psychological requirement. Exhaustion then takes command because the person refused to include it in the plan. A disciplined life is not one in which rest disappears. It is one in which rest is chosen rather than stolen through collapse and distraction. There is a difference between restorative rest and avoidance. Rest returns capacity. Avoidance often leaves the task larger and the mind more fragmented. You can ask, after this pause, will I be more able to return? Am I resting my body or escaping an emotion? Have I named when I will begin again? What form of rest would actually help? Sometimes the answer is sleep. Sometimes it is movement. Sometimes it is silence, nourishment, conversation, or a complete day without work. Sometimes the answer is that rest is not needed. Courage is. Inner command requires enough honesty to know the difference. The standard you obey in private also appears in what you tolerate from yourself. This is not an invitation to self-criticism. It is an invitation to accountability. Do you allow yourself to speak cruelly because you are stressed? Do you repeatedly arrive late and call it personality? Do you spend what was promised elsewhere? Do you avoid difficult conversations and then resent others for not understanding? Do you ask for trust while keeping your own commitments vague? Self-respect is not only protecting yourself from others, it is refusing to become someone who repeatedly violates your own values. When you fail, repair quickly. Name what happened. Avoid the dramatic declaration that everything is ruined. Make the smallest honest repair. Change the system that allowed repetition. Begin again. A missed day is information. A repeated pattern is a system problem. A failure is not permission for abandonment. The mind learns command through return. This is why streaks can be useful but dangerous. A streak creates momentum, yet when it breaks, a person may believe the entire practice has lost value. True discipline is not the ability to remain unbroken forever. It is the ability to restart without turning one interruption into an identity. The sentence is not, I never fail. The sentence is, I do not disappear when I fail. There is a quiet danger in making self-command dependent on mood. On inspired days, the promise feels sacred. On ordinary days, it feels negotiable. But a life is built mostly on ordinary days. The private standard must therefore be designed for the version of you who is tired, distracted, and not being watched. This is why preparation matters. Place the book where you will read it. Remove the temptation before the difficult hour. Make the healthy choice easier to begin. Ask another person to hold you accountable when secrecy protects the old pattern. Environment is not a substitute for character. It is one of the ways character becomes practical. You are not proving that you can defeat every impulse through force. You are building a life in which the wiser action has a clear path. Choose one promise for the next 7 days. Only one. It should be clear enough that completion is undeniable and modest enough that excuses become visible. I will write for 20 minutes. I will walk for 15 minutes. I will place my phone outside the room at 10. I will save a defined amount. I will complete one pending task before entertainment. I will pause before replying when anger rises. Write the promise in one sentence, then define when, where, and how. At 7 at the desk. After lunch around the block. At 10 in the kitchen drawer every Friday before spending, before opening the streaming app. Whenever the body signals the first wave, make the environment support the instruction. Prepare the page, place the shoes near the door, automate the transfer, remove the app. Write the pause method where you can see it. Willpower is strengthened when friction is designed intelligently. Let every fulfilled promise become a quiet vote for the person you are becoming. No single vote defines the outcome, but repetition changes what your own mind expects from you. At the end of each day, record only 3 things. Did I keep the promise? What helped or interfered? What adjustment is responsible? Do not add a speech about your worth. The exercise is not a test of whether you are a good person. It is the construction of evidence. After 7 days, your mind may begin to hear your word differently. The instruction no longer sounds like another emotional promise. It sounds like something connected to action. This quiet credibility changes how you stand in larger moments. You need less external pressure because your own decision carries weight. You need less dramatic motivation because action has become a known path. You recover faster because failure no longer means disappearance. Private standards create public steadiness. There is no audience in the deepest part of command. There is only the relationship between awareness and action, intention and follow-through, word and behavior. When that relationship becomes honest, a final integration becomes possible. Attention can be guarded, emotion can be heard, language can be examined, boundaries can be maintained, urgency can be delayed, pressure can be navigated, promises can be trusted. The next chapter gathers these parts into one living posture, the inner throne, not as a symbol of superiority, but as the place from which responsibility becomes whole. Chapter 10. The inner throne. The phone lights up again. The room is the same. Morning light rests against the wall. The message is difficult. The body reacts. The jaw tightens. A familiar interpretation begins to rise, but this time, the reaction does not become the ruler of the day. You feel the first wave and recognize it. You place both feet on the floor. You read the message once more. You do not deny the discomfort, and you do not let the discomfort write the answer. You decide when to respond, what requires action, and what belongs only to fear. The world has not become gentler. The message has not changed. The difference is that command remained within. This is the inner throne. It is not a fantasy of superiority. It is not the belief that you are beyond influence, pain, mistake, or uncertainty. It is the place from which the different parts of your experience can be heard without allowing any one part to become the whole. From this place, attention becomes chosen territory, emotion becomes information, thought becomes interpretation rather than automatic truth. A boundary becomes a responsible action, a pause becomes protection, discipline becomes self-trust. Calm becomes the capacity to remain present, not the performance of having no feeling. The inner throne is not occupied once, it is returned to repeatedly. There will be mornings when fear reaches it first. There will be conversations in which anger speaks before wisdom. There will be seasons when exhaustion weakens every practice. There will be losses that make all previous certainty feel small. Command is not proved by never leaving the throne. It is proved by remembering the way back. This return begins with 5 questions. What is happening? What am I feeling? What story am I adding? What is within my responsibility? What action reflects the person I choose to be? These questions gather the architecture of inner command into one sequence. What is happening? This returns you to fact. It separates the event from imagination, memory, and prediction. It does not minimize the event. It gives it a clear shape. What am I feeling? This prevents emotion from operating through disguise. Fear no longer needs to call itself certainty. Shame no longer needs to call itself humility. Anger no longer needs to call itself justice before being examined. What story am I adding? This reveals the internal meaning. A delay may be interpreted as rejection. A criticism may be interpreted as proof of worthlessness. A disagreement may be interpreted as loss of love. The story may contain truth, but it must be seen before it can be evaluated. What is within my responsibility? This returns energy from the uncontrollable. You may not control the outcome, the other person's character, the past, or the timing. You may control the next communication, the boundary, the preparation, the request for help, or the decision to leave. What action reflects the person I choose to be? This brings identity and value into the present. It does not ask what action guarantees approval or comfort. It asks what action deserves your participation. The answer may be patience. It may be confrontation. It may be apology. It may be silence. It may be preparation. It may be rest. It may be a direct no. It may be a courageous yes. It may be the admission that you do not know. Inner command makes room for humility. A person who believes command means always being right becomes rigid. He cannot receive correction, because correction feels like removal from power. She cannot revise a decision, because revision feels like weakness. This is not sovereignty. It is insecurity wearing ceremonial clothing. True authority can say, "I was wrong. I need more information. I changed my mind. I cannot do this alone. My reaction caused harm. Your perspective revealed something I missed." These statements do not weaken command. They demonstrate that truth has greater authority than image. The inner throne also requires values that can guide decisions when outcomes are uncertain. What matters most when you cannot have everything? Honesty, safety, compassion, justice, loyalty, freedom, responsibility, growth, peace. Values can conflict. Honesty without compassion can become cruelty. Loyalty without boundaries can become self-erasure. Peace without justice can become silence in the presence of harm. Courage without wisdom can become recklessness. Command is the art of holding these tensions without reducing life to slogans. You may need to tell a truth that disappoints someone. You may need to leave a relationship while still caring. You may need to forgive without restoring the same access. You may need to protect peace by entering a difficult conflict. You may need to remain patient while taking practical action. The inner throne is where competing values are placed in conscious order. It is also where control is returned to its proper size. You do not rule other minds. You do not command time. You do not control every consequence. You do not eliminate uncertainty through discipline. You do not become immune to grief by understanding it. You govern participation. What will you give attention to? What meaning will you question? What word will you keep? What behavior will you refuse? What help will you seek? What next step will you take? This form of command is quieter than domination. It may not look impressive from outside, yet it changes the quality of a life because it changes who or what is allowed to make the final decision. There is a danger in spiritual language that glorifies detachment. A person may use inner command to avoid intimacy, vulnerability, or responsibility. He may call emotional distance peace. She may call refusal to listen a boundary. Someone may call indifference sovereignty. The test is not whether you feel untouched. The test is whether your command allows you to become more honest, more responsible, more capable of love, and less controlled by fear. A strong inner throne does not isolate the ruler from the kingdom. It makes wise relationship possible. You can listen without being absorbed. You can care without abandoning yourself. You can apologize without collapsing into shame. You can receive love without making it your only source of worth. You can disagree without needing to destroy. You can remain open while retaining discernment. This is mature command. It does not build walls everywhere. It builds doors that open and close consciously. The inner throne also changes the relationship with success. Without command, achievement can become another external ruler. Praise creates urgency to repeat the performance. Growth creates fear of losing position. The person who once sought freedom becomes controlled by the need to maintain an image. From the inner throne, success can be received without worship. It can be used, shared, and enjoyed without becoming the source of identity. Failure can be examined without becoming a sentence. Both are information within a larger path. This protects you from the pendulum of pride and collapse. You do not need to become larger when applauded or smaller when criticized. You remain responsible for the same questions. What is true? What matters? What is mine to do? There is also room for mystery. Not every experience will be explained. Not every delay will reveal a lesson. Inner command does not force meaning onto every wound. Sometimes it simply allows you to remain honest in the presence of what you do not understand. That honesty is a form of spiritual strength. It says, I do not know why this happened. I do not know what the future contains. But I will not surrender my attention, character, and next action to the absence of an answer. The throne is therefore not a destination above ordinary life. It is a seat within ordinary life. Return to while washing dishes, answering messages, entering meetings, grieving losses, and choosing what the next hour will contain. The daily practice is not complicated. In the morning, remember your priorities before opening the world's demands. During the day, Notice the first wave before it becomes behavior. When emotion rises, hear the report. When language becomes absolute, make it precise. When pressure appears, examine urgency. When a boundary is needed, state it clearly. When a promise is made, keep it or revise it responsibly. When you fail, return without self-contempt. At night, ask 3 questions. Where did I maintain command today? Where did I surrender it? What will I practice differently tomorrow? Do not turn the review into a courtroom. It is a map. You may discover that command was maintained in a moment no one else would recognize. You did not send the message, you asked for time, you rested before collapse, you told the truth. You allowed someone to misunderstand. You completed the private promise. You left the argument before anger became harm. These small moments are not small. They are where the law of inner command becomes a lived reality. The law is simple. Whatever governs your attention, interpretation, and response will influence the direction of your life. This is not a promise that thought controls every external event. It is a recognition that internal command changes the way you meet events, choose actions, build relationships, and recover from what cannot be controlled. A person without inner command may possess opportunities and destroy them through impulse. A person with inner command may face difficulty and still build a path through deliberate action. Neither person controls the whole world, but one participates consciously in the part that belongs to him. That participation is the throne. It is not made of certainty. It is made of presence. It is not protected by aggression. It is protected by awareness, boundaries, and disciplined choice. It is not inherited. It is practiced. And it cannot be granted by a title, an audience, a relationship, or a victory. External power may expand your influence, but it cannot create internal authority. Only lived integrity can do that. Return now to the opening scene. The message remains unanswered for the moment. You stand, drink water, and continue the morning you chose. Later, when the body is calmer and the facts are clearer, you respond. Perhaps the answer is firm. Perhaps it is brief. Perhaps it changes the relationship. Perhaps it opens a necessary conversation. Perhaps no answer is required. Whatever the form, it is yours. The world spoke first, but the final command remained within. Conclusion. The authority that cannot be given. There is a form of authority that no position can grant and no crowd can confirm. It does not arrive with a title. It is not measured by how many people obey you, how much attention you receive, or how carefully the world protects your plans. External power can increase reach. It can provide resources, choices, and influence. But it cannot create the capacity to remain conscious when fear rises, pressure accelerates, or approval disappears. That authority must be practiced within. At the beginning of this journey, a single message was enough to reorganize an entire day. The body reacted, the mind interpreted, and impulse moved toward action before awareness had entered the room. This is how inner command is often lost, not through one final defeat, but through countless moments in which something outside is allowed to decide what happens next. Now the sequence is visible. An event occurs. The body responds. A story begins. Emotion offers a direction. Urgency demands speed. A choice waits beneath the noise. The existence of that choice does not mean every situation is simple. It does not mean pain becomes optional, or that discipline can prevent loss. Life will continue to contain events you did not choose and cannot repair. People may misunderstand you. Work may fail. Relationships may end. Bodies may weaken. The future may refuse to reveal itself. Inner command is not the power to prevent every storm. It is the power to remain present enough to choose how you will walk through it. You may feel fear without allowing fear to write the entire future. You may feel anger without using anger to justify cruelty. You may feel grief without making grief the final identity. You may experience uncertainty without offering urgency the throne. You may need help without interpreting help as defeat. This is not emotional perfection. It is responsible participation. The world may speak first. Your history may speak loudly. Old conditioning may produce a response before you understand where it came from. But the first voice is not always the final authority. You can pause. You can name what is present. You can separate fact from prediction. You can examine the story. You can protect attention. You can state a boundary. You can delay a consequential decision. You can ask for help. You can keep one small promise. You can return after failure. These acts appear ordinary, yet they are the foundation of a life no longer governed entirely by reaction. There will be days when you forget everything. You will send the message, raise the voice, abandon the plan, or surrender attention to noise. Do not turn the mistake into a new throne for shame. Return, repair what can be repaired. Learn what the reaction revealed. Adjust the system. Practice again. The authority within you is not destroyed by one failure. It is weakened only when failure becomes permission to disappear. Remember that command is not domination. The goal is not to become hard, distant, or untouched. A mature inner authority makes deeper relationship possible because you no longer need others to regulate every part of your identity. You can care without clinging, listen without surrendering judgment, love without abandoning boundaries, and speak truth without creating war. You become less predictable to manipulation and more dependable to those you love. That is an important distinction. Inner command is not measured by how difficult you are to influence. Wisdom requires influence. Good counsel should matter. Evidence should change your mind. Honest feedback should enter. Love should reach you. The goal is not to close every gate. The goal is to know why it opens. Let truth enter. Let responsibility enter. Let compassion enter. Let correction enter. Let beauty, grief, and genuine relationship enter. But do not grant permanent residence to every panic, insult, demand, or borrowed expectation. Your attention is not public property. Your emotions are not shameful rulers. Your boundaries are not declarations of war. Your delays are not weakness. Your private promises are not insignificant. They are the living structure of command. From this day forward, the practice can be held in 5 questions. What is happening? What am I feeling? What story am I adding? What is within my responsibility? What action reflects the person I choose to be? Use them when the message arrives. Use them when pressure enters the room. Use them when fear predicts an ending. Use them when approval begins to feel like oxygen. Use them when the old pattern says there is no choice. There may not always be a good option. Sometimes command means choosing the least harmful path, accepting a painful consequence, or acting with incomplete information. Inner authority does not guarantee comfort. It offers integrity. And integrity creates a form of peace that does not depend on the world becoming perfectly arranged. It is the peace of knowing that you remained present, that you did not make panic your profit, that you did not trade tomorrow for immediate relief, that you did not abandon your values simply because another person was displeased, that when you failed, you returned. If this journey has helped you reclaim even one part of your inner authority, subscribe and remain connected to this path. There are deeper dimensions of the mind still waiting to be understood, and every conscious step strengthens the command you are learning to carry within. As you leave this page and return to ordinary life, do not search for a dramatic test. The first practice may be small: a delayed reply, a protected morning, a boundary spoken without accusation, a task completed after motivation fades, a fear named before it becomes a command. These are the places where authority becomes real. The mind learns through lived evidence, not through beautiful ideas alone. One conscious act is worth more than 100 declarations of future mastery. Let the practice remain human. Some days you will hold the center. Some days you will recognize the surrender only afterward. Both can serve the path if recognition becomes responsibility. The goal is not to become someone who cannot be touched. It is to become someone who can be touched by life without being carried away from himself entirely. The final authority cannot be given to you because it has always existed as a capacity. It waits in the breath before the reply, in the silence before the promise. In the moment after emotion speaks and before action begins, in the decision to protect what matters without becoming what wounded you, in the willingness to stand within uncertainty and remain responsible for the next step. The world may speak first. Fear may speak loudly. Emotion may demand immediate action. But the final command is still yours to give. Take your place within your own mind. And from this moment forward, answer life consciously.